Welcome to this episode of Men Who Understood the Times. I'm Michael and Sam and Phil. Today we're going to be talking about the second part of what are Christians to do with Pride Month. But before we get there, our disclaimer that we are just two pastors and a layperson. We're not speaking for our churches or our church body, that we're just three guys on a Sunday afternoon getting together, uh, applying God's word to these kinds of issues. And here, looking at the issues having to do with sexuality and deviant sexuality. So, Sam, it's a Sunday afternoon. You're not in your church office. So, what are you drinking?
Yes. Yes, I have Coors Banquet. One left in the fridge. So very happy today on a hot day. Refreshing, crisp beer.
Banquet. I was going to tease Sam earlier when he showed the Coors Banquet and say, you know what? If I was closer, I would get you some real beer
This is
rather than
uh
a Coors.
this is uh this is the anti-woke beer, right? It's
Is it?
not Budweiser, right? As long as it's not
Okay.
Budweiser, right?
Phil, what do you have?
It is also hot down here. I've got a hard cider.
Oh yeah, your own homemade. Hey, here's a.
Yep.
So we got a fast day today of Bible study and worship. We had a church council meeting right after church, and then one of our members wanted to go hiking, so rushed up the mountain for a 2.5 mile hike. So I figured I earn this. So my lovely wife made me a boozy peppermint shake. So it's like Christmas in June. And the reason we're having these now is because one of our members had passed away and she liked peppermint schnapps. So at the funeral, her daughter brought 4 bottles of peppermint schnapps to me. And I was thinking, oh, this is going to be a pretty fun funeral. But now, uh, and all the drinks that have to do with peppermint schnapps are all Christmas type drinks. So that's why we're having this. So the first part of this, of what are Christians to do with Pride Month, is are we willing to stand up to the pagan god, like like Baal and Asherah, sexual gods, to do this like the Major League Baseball players? To set the stage before you talk about this, Sam, is that several weeks ago there was Pride Night in every stadium except for the Texas Rangers in Major League Baseball. And in San Francisco, which has a very large gay population as a city, that the San Francisco Giants had their Pride Night and they had the rainbow on the baseball caps, and three of the pitchers wrote Genesis 9, verses 9 to 12, yeah, verses 12 to 16, which is where God gives the promise of the rainbow. And they had written that on that baseball cap next to the rainbow. And then the Major League Baseball came out and warning them, saying, quote, the writing on the cap violates our rules and consistent with normal practice. We have warned the players about future violations. They didn't punish them in any way, but they did warn them. So, Sam, what do you think? Are we as Christians, whatever our workplace setting is, are we willing to stand up like these three Giants pitchers?
Well, and the thing that I noticed, like you said about the rules thing, is that the writing itself, writing anything, was against the rules. But they decided to do it anyway in protest, presumably out of their conviction from their faith. I would assume they're Christian. No, they had to be Christian. They wrote a Bible passage on it, of course. So that's why they did it, and they were willing to break the rules on paper for their league uh, to share their faith and to say, yes, I'm in this game. Yes, I am wearing the hat, but here's what I believe about this topic according to the Christian faith. And breaking that human rule, they were willing to do. And I think that's really admirable. Now, as far as we are concerned, the question is, who's we, I think?
Mm-hmm.
Are we talking about pastors? Well, the thing is, with pastors, we don't have to pay a price for being against homosexuality in our workplace. As well as pastors, this is what we're expected to teach. This is the Bible truth. The people who we're employed by, so to speak, are expecting us to do that, I think. And so we don't have to pay a price for standing up for it in our professional lives. That's different when it comes to WELL's members, I think, or any Christian in any context where their workplace is expecting them to go to the DEI presentations, the Pride events. There's where you have to start to think about, are we going to be like the MLB players? Actually having the sports figures be a good role model, which is a great thing. That's a shift, I think, from some, it's much better to see that type of example from the sports figures than some other kinds of examples that we've seen from some people. So the difficulty is, from my perspective as a pastor, it is hard to tell somebody, hey, you should stick to your convictions, go with your conscience about this topic, because I know that they are more likely to have to pay some material price than I am. But that being said, I think that's why a lot of pastors maybe are hesitant to tell somebody you should not go to that thing, you should speak up at work, because, well, we don't have that stakes in it that they do. But as far as that individual Christian, it is more important for us to make sure that we have a clean conscience before God than really anything else, as far as this topic is concerned. And that can get kind of complicated for individuals, and it calls for wisdom, obviously. So that's my thought on that specific issue. I don't know if you guys had anything else to add to that.
Yeah, yeah. I got a couple of things before I throw it over to you, Phil. Is uh, a biblical example of this would be the three men in the fiery furnace. They're standing up all alone, and whenever I look at that story, I think of there are going to be Jews that were bowing down. There had to be. It wasn't just these three Jewish men that were alone, but everyone else knelt and bowed down to the statue, but these three men refused to. And then Daniel. Daniel knew the rule, that he was not to pray to any god except for the king, and he decided to pray anyhow. He didn't have to pray in front of the open window. He could have prayed anywhere else and kept it silent. But I think Daniel purposely did it in the window to thumb his nose at this rule. And so uh, I think there are stories like with the Giants, they could have decided to wear just a regular baseball cap, these pitchers, instead of wearing the rainbow hat. They still would have gotten flack for it, but maybe not as much as writing the Bible verse on there. There was another minor league team, the New York Revolution, that the players refused to wear the pride stuff for their pride night, and so the team forfeited the game. And then they felt bad that they had to cancel the game, and so they gave $10,000 to some pride organization. So, like you were saying, Sam, is how do you do this respectfully in whatever kind of workplace that you're at? Hockey players have this problem too with are they going to wear the jersey and so forth when they have those gay nights and so forth. Some of the sports don't have to worry about it, like the NFL, because they're not playing right now. So since we mentioned Seinfeld in the last episode, and Sam, you made me feel really old that Seinfeld was off the air before you were born. But Phil, you would remember this episode of Kramer, where Kramer is told, wear the ribbon. He just wants to support AIDS. And they say, well, you can't support AIDS unless you're wearing the AIDS ribbon. He doesn't want to wear the ribbon. So they chase him down. That's this kind of thing. And as you're talking about sports models or sports athletes being role models, so I gave you guys a week since last week. How many World Cup games have you watched since last week? 0. Sam?
No.
Oh,
0.
man,
Sorry.
I've been watching games and highlights every day. I figure the number was 0. But here's the thing is maybe our American athletes can learn something from these other athletes around the world, that they are crossing themselves as strong Christians. They're raising their hands up and praising God. They're getting together in prayer circles and praying as a team or with other Christians from around the world and so forth. I'm not sure how that all works, what language they're praying in, but the key is that would be great if our own athletes did that as well. Phil, what do you think as far as this? Are we as Christians willing to stand up for our faith?
Well, like Sam led off with, that's the exact same thing I was going to say is who is we? Because it depends, right? So like when I look at my kids, who are 19 and 21, and I look at some of their friends and stuff, raised Christian and raised while they were young in a culture that started to be more adopting of the LGBTQ plus whatever lifestyles, they saw a lot and they were catechized a lot. And so, they're in a really good place where, yeah, they have issues in the workplace, but they know where they're coming from and they know, or at least they're finding out how to thread the needle between being a good employee and being a good Christian, right? Obviously you can't not be a Christian on the job, but you can offer grace in certain situations and you can overlook certain things as long as you're not being asked to comply or to affirm something that you don't believe, right? And so, I feel like the younger generation is in a better place than maybe people 10, 20 years older than them are. And then going back to the baseball thing, the choice of passage is really, really thoughtful in my opinion, right? It's God's promise. It's God affirming the rainbow as a promise of peace and a promise of, watching over the earth. But then you go a couple verses earlier, and what is God telling them? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, right? Like a reinstantiation of the creation imperative. And obviously the LGBTQ lifestyle can't support that. So, it's a nice passage and a nice pericope to, think about.
Uh, I saw this headline from the Babylon Bee. It said, in an effort to better reflect the league's values, Major League Baseball announced that it had officially rebranded from MLB to MLBTQ plus. I thought that was a good one. Uh, at the last minute, our church decided that they were going to get people together at our minor league baseball team, the Spuds, on Friday night, and just meet behind first base, all sit together. I was busy, and Sean and I had 8 people over our house, so we didn't go to the baseball game. But I was kind of conflicted on whether we are going to go to the game because I was downtown, and no one knew this when they scheduled. They just said it's a Friday night. Next year, I will know. It's a Friday night in June. It was Big Gay Day at the Spuds. So downtown, they had all this gay stuff, and that's what they were promoting. And then all culminating at the baseball diamond. Now, I wouldn't have I didn't text everyone and say, oh, don't go because there's going to be gay people there. If we would have gone, we would have gone there and just pretended we were Elka. No, I'm kidding. That we would have just gone there and then been Christians, watched the baseball game, and then it would have been a good example for us to go, all right, this is the sinful lifestyle out there. And one last thing on this, it is hard when we're doing this by ourselves, to be a Daniel, to be a Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego by ourselves. This is why it's so important to gather other Christians around you. I think of COVID. If Christians and churches would have just said right in the beginning, no, we're not going along with any of this nonsense. There's not a single thing the government could have done because there would have been millions of Christians and tens of thousands of Christian churches. They can't shut everyone down. They can't arrest everyone. They just would have let it go. It's the same thing. If you gather together your fellow Christians in whatever workplace you guys are talking about, the companies have to go along with you because they can't fire the whole force. So that's why it's so important to bond with your Christian siblings. Phil, what do you think? Is public support waning for being gay?
So admittedly, I live in a bit of a bubble being in Alabama. So if you drive around in Alabama, you'll see cars with a red bumper sticker with a little blue dot in the middle. And it's a bright blue dot in a very red state, right? So our 6 of our 7 districts are Republican, and the 7th one is kind of a make-believe district to give the Democrats a district. So it is very nice in a sense. We do still have a gay pride parade every year in Huntsville. It got rained out this year. God intervened. You've got other businesses that are affirming and whatnot. I think a lot of companies, unless they're firmly entrenched in the West Coast or something like that, are visibly less publicly supportive. And so, for example, in my industry of aerospace and defense, you're not going to see a whole lot of aerospace and defense companies put the pride flag on their logos on Twitter or LinkedIn like they used to. But internally, the policies really haven't changed, right? Whether it's support for homosexual and transgender lifestyles. Like, for example, my employer has an internal webpage that advises you what insurance to get if you're homosexual, what insurance to get if you're thinking about transitioning yourself or your minor child. Um,
Wow.
Recently, this spring, Pete Hegseth, Secretary of War, gave a speech from our factory shop floor. It was televised. You can go look it up. And part of that speech, besides just riling up the industrial base and, being excited about commercial vendors, was he blasted DEI in front of a company based in Seattle. And so at our next town hall meeting, there were a lot of questions about that where, management walked it back and said, well, we got to play ball with them, but, we love you guys and blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, I guess externally things look like they're improving and God grant it, but a lot of companies internally haven't really changed anything.
Yeah, that's interesting. I appreciate you sharing that real life example because I've talked with other pastors and they've talked about, well, yeah, wokeness has gone away. And it's because the president has outlawed a lot of that DEI stuff in our universities. Sam's there shaking his head. I don't think it's gone away. It's just hiding, right? Because there's there is still a lot of gay stuff out there. There's gay movies on Peacock. So some of my streaming services, they still got the banner up on top. So you can watch those kind of things. There's the pride parades, rainbow flags on the company logos. But like you said, Phil, not as much as in years past. And I'm just curious if people are getting burned out on the gay stuff. But Sam, what do you think? You're shaking your head over
Looking
there.
at some data, looking at it from another perspective as well, because there's kind of two ideas you could have. One is
Okay.
if you look at the comparison from the peak of when people were most in favor of homosexuality, whatever measure that is, whether it's in favor of gay marriage or just in general, like this is a positive thing or a moral thing. The peak of it was about a couple years ago. Since then, it's decreased. You can find lots of poll data on these things that in the 2021, 2022, it was the highest support. And since then, it's gone down. And you can say, okay, that's a good pattern. That's a good trend that people are not as in favor of this type of thing. But then you consider what the actual number is, and it goes from 80% to 75% or whatever the number is. And you realize, okay, we're still far more in favor of homosexuality as a culture than we were in 2015, than we were in 2000, and so on. Far higher. So it's a small dip. Now, what's interesting, one thing I found in the numbers is if you break it down by generation and men and women, is there's kind of an interesting trend because young people are far more in favor of it than older people still, and yet there's a gap in the men and women who are like the 18 to 29-year-olds, the Generation Z group. While a lot of them are very much in favor of it, there's also a gap between the men and the women's opinion, which is just a little, I don't know what to make of that exactly. I just think it's an interesting trend. The other part of that is in my experience, in my just seeing what people are saying, like on the internet, in person, even too. If a person at this point, it seems to me, a young person or just whoever, if you're against that, if you're not in favor of homosexuality, you're like really not in favor of it. It's kind of more of an extreme opinion, and that's kind of how I have experienced it too. Of like, yeah, this is really a serious thing. I want to take it seriously. It's not just like, oh, it's not a big deal. Yeah, I'm against it, but I don't care that much. Like, no, a lot of people see this as a big problem for culture and society. So even though the share of that is smaller, who are against it still, even in the younger group, those people really feel strongly. It seems to me, and it's hard to measure that, but I would say based on just anecdotal evidence that would seem to indicate it to me. I want to highlight one last thing too, and I'm going to pick on JD Vance for a minute just to highlight, and lest anyone think this is a partisan podcast, I'm going to be a little bit critical, but it's interesting to see the contrast when you think of the Republican versus Democrat, for example. And now we have, like, I remember there was a quote from JD Vance when they were in the campaign, and he said something like, Trump's getting the normal gay guy vote. And I don't know what that means exactly, but the point being that even the current administration, which a lot of people consider very like hardcore right wing, I think, or liberals think that, you know, it's a really extreme guy, and administration. Well, they're not really anti-gay at all, really, when you get down to it. And then with the MLB thing, he had a quote too. JD Vance said, "Trump won. We don't have to do this anymore with the the punishment and stuff." It's like, well, yeah. It's not really like that's not really any reason why even the Republican Party is far more liberal than the Democrats were 20 years ago, maybe less even. So that just highlights, like, yeah, there's some good things, good trends, people seeing problems, and yet we've got a long ways to go, and we're still way more deep into this type of problem and culture than we were before.
Yeah. So you shared a lot of the statistics that I was going to share, so I'm not going to read those. But if listeners, you can just do a Google search like I did. The Gallup poll has, so just real specifically, that most of the recent changes in LGBTQ plus attitudes have occurred among Republicans, like Sam said. For example, in 2021 and 2022, 55% of Republicans said they favored same-sex legal marriage, but today that figure is 37%. Among independents, support has dropped 6 points to 67%, while Democrats' views are the same. In 2022, 87% in favor. Where you mentioned about the difference between men and women, I think the difference is going to be that, yeah, you look at the statistics the last few years, young men are becoming more conservative politically. You can take that however you want. Young women are becoming more liberal politically. So there's going to be a divide there. And part of that's going to be based on empathy. And so you can see that women are going to be more empathetic. And so they're going to feel for those that are what they would call marginalized and so forth. And like you said, Sam, about Republicans, they're going to say, well, we're a big tent. So we're going to get everyone in here, black, white, gay, and so forth. And you're right. It's not that the Republicans are, hard right. It's really, if you pay attention to politics, and I know I do, that Republicans today are really the same as the Clinton Democrats from several decades ago, before you were born, Sam. That those we are much more liberal, and that's just like we talked about last episode. That's just wearing people down, and then that takes a long time, and that goes to the next point. So, Sam, if you want to talk about this, we mentioned last week that it took us several decades to get to this point, to be able to accept societally LGBTQ, gay pride, a Pride Month, transgenderism, all of these kinds of things just wearing us down. So now, as Christians and Christian churches, are we prepared for the long march to return to, quote, normal?
Yeah, and I hope we are, because we should understand that really, when it gets right down to it, we are not the ones in charge of the way history plays out. We get to play our role as God has established for us, as God gives us opportunity in our lives. We know that God has a plan for history that culminates in Christ's return in glory, and we can live joyfully now and work towards improving our neighbor's life as God has given us good works to do, and part of that is this topic, because when you get right down to it, the homosexuality and transgenderism, all this stuff is harmful to those people, and that's one thing that is maybe we should keep in mind. want to have compassion on them to that degree and say, yeah, we don't want you to do this because we know it's not good for you. We know that it destroys your body in various ways and your soul, more importantly. And so, yeah, we take little steps at a time. It's good if we have opportunity. A Christian in a role of government can promote good laws. That's a very good thing to do when you get the chance. We do votes. You know, our country, we've been given the chance to participate in government. And that's a good thing. That's a blessing that we want to take advantage of. All along, not, you know, understanding that we are maybe not going to see, maybe it'll just get worse and worse in our lifetime. That's an option too. And that doesn't mean we're going to give up. And that doesn't mean that we lost. It just means that it's going to take the next generation. And we'll talk about preparing the next generation for maybe some things, but we'll talk about that later too. But they might have to, our children, my children, their children may see things that are incomprehensible to us someday. And that's what we want to focus on to prepare them for that.
Yeah, talking about incomprehensible. I've been around for a long time, and we've gotten worse and worse. We're still not as bad as the cultures like in Rome and so forth. And yet, this is something I never thought I would hear. So this is from Louder with Crowder. I'm quoting: 7 people were shot and killed in Chicago over the weekend. At least 39 people were injured. Rather than focus all efforts on ending the war zone in one of America's major cities, Mayor of Chicago would like to bring your attention to a so-called, quote, trans femicide state of emergency. No one knows what that means, nor does anyone care. This is why it's both bizarre and dangerous for the mayor to focus efforts on something that does not exist. And I've heard a couple of podcasts, read a couple of articles on it, that there really is no such thing as trans femicide. That they're even putting people who are supposedly transgender and then they've died of cancer, and then they put this in as a statistic, they died of trans femicide. But that is just way out there. It's just really weird and decadent, and it's still out there in a culture. And this morning, I saw a reel by Daily Wire where there was a guy on the street and he was interviewing people at a pride parade. And his point was he asked the guys first, so the gay guys, and then the gay ladies, the lesbians, the number of sexual partners. I'm not going to ask you guys to guess because it's just gross. The lesbians, they said, one or two, they pointed to their partner, or they said maybe a dozen, maybe 2 dozen. The guys, it was hundreds. One guy, it was thousands. He said he would kick a guy out of bed and then he would get another guy and his words were reel him in. That is definitely not healthy. It is not good for the body. And so part of this, what we're talking about, is not just to show, hey, there's this decadence out there and warning our people. We're going to talk about that later and preparing them, but also so that we are willing to reach out to these people, just like Jonah did eventually with Nineveh. What about you, Phil? What do you have to say on this? Are we prepared as Christians and in churches for the long march back to normal?
I hope we are. But if we are, we need to talk about these things in a firm and principled way. I'll just put it that way. So, like, for example, Sam, earlier you mentioned it's difficult to talk about, how people should react to certain things when you don't have skin in the game, but they have skin in the game. And you may not know the exact situations that they have to deal with. But my encouragement for pastors would be to teach on the principles, right? That, you can't affirm, you can't deny your faith, these are the things you can't do. And what you can do is, as long as you're not violating those, you have great Christian freedom, instead of just simply saying, you got Christian freedom, go figure it out, right? And ask God for forgiveness when you screw up, right? Which we all do. And we all screw up when we all ask God for forgiveness. But just having the principles out there so that the individual Christian can say, okay, this is what I was taught in catechism. This is what I learned in church. And the situation I'm looking at, here's the weapons I need to pull out, or here's, the shield I need to use. Because it is difficult and the situation will change and continue to change, but God's word stands firm and doesn't change. So those timeless principles are what informs us as we walk the Christian life.
I think that, I've been a pastor for 30 years, that we as a church and as Christians, we've always believed that homosexuality is a sin. But I don't remember us as a church or church body. I've been involved in 3 churches. We didn't promote that, just go out there and say, calling this a sin. I think a lot of times we have kept our heads down. We have kept our mouths closed, unless someone asked us in private, but we weren't out there in the streets. With the last part, last bullet point, looking at, is society changing a little bit? Perhaps they are. Well, that's a great opportunity for us to reach out to these people who are saying, hey, there's something wrong with this. That they may not be coming at it from a Christian perspective. They just know biologically that two guys and two ladies, they cannot procreate. This is not natural. No matter how much they try and have documentaries, and these are real things where they'll look for gay frogs or gay animals and so forth, and then say, oh, see, and that works in the animal kingdom, it's going to work here in the human kingdom as well. But then also the opposite side, as Sam mentioned, it can be getting worse too. Well, then that's even more so why we need to be reaching out in these things. The reason I was thinking of this, of the long road back to normal, is we're Americans. Americans are not patient people. We want a quick fix. The left, they did this on purpose. They knew what they were doing in wearing us down as Christians over the long decade. They were playing the long game and taking over our major institutions like our grade schools and our universities and the military. Okay, and they got all this stuff, and we call it wokeness, but it's all in there. Well, now we as Christians need to do the same. And we think, oh, if we get the right president in to have his executive orders and the right Supreme Court justices to uphold laws and the Constitution, and we have the right Congress, if they would actually ever do anything and then make laws, then we can fix it. You and I know as pastors and lay people that that's not the way it works. We have to change people's hearts. It has to go from the bottom up. We have to do the exact same thing that the left did, but do this as Christians, not from the right, not as independents, or from the left. We have to just do this as Christians. So my encouragement to people is, if you want to affect change, you've got to get involved. And that means being on a school board for your public school. That means being on the library. So you pick the books that are going to be out there. You need to run for offices and those kind of things. And then even if you don't have the time to do those things, go to the meetings and then speak up. Pull your kids out of these woke institutions. I say this all the time. Don't give your money to companies that hate you. So if there's a bank or a soda company or car company or whatever it is that they're going to be promoting this gay pride stuff, they're promoting abortion, they're promoting transgender, and whatever it is, that there's some other company you can go to, and maybe it's better if you go local and find a Christian company there in town that you can support. Don't give the money to those who are going to who hate you and are going to do everything they can to persecute Christians. Give your money and your support to those that can build everything up, and that's how we change things. But that takes time. So with the fourth bullet point, can churches have faith and family nights in June? So I heard this story this week, and I thought this was hilarious, and I wanted to share it with you guys. So Mark Fitzpatrick is the owner of a bar in India. He created, quote, Heterosexual Awesomeness Month in June. Fitzpatrick says he chose the word awesomeness because from a Christian perspective, pride is a sin. So get this. So the event includes special promotions for heterosexual customers that's meant to celebrate the traditional relationships and family values. So Monday is heterosexual male Monday. So the three of us could go there. And we, as heterosexual males, we get a beer for free, or the first beer for free. I love this. He calls it beers for breeders. Wednesday is heterosexual couples get 15% off their total order. Thursday is all day per hetero happy hour. So Fitzpatrick says that heterosexual awesomeness month is an opportunity to celebrate God's design for man and woman and to celebrate that sexual attraction between the two of them. So, Phil, rather than our businesses and so forth having, the pride nights at the baseball game or whatever it is in the month of June, what do you think? Can our churches have faith and family nights in June to kind of, in my estimation, thumb our nose at all this stuff that goes on in June that is against God?
Yeah. So down here in Alabama, our governor, Kay Ivey, we call her Meemaw, signed a proclamation declaring June 2026 as Strong Families Month in Alabama, highlighting the significance of homes led by a father and a mother and their impact on the children's academic, moral, and social development. So, I mean, if the state can do it, why not the church, right? We should be encouraging godly family structures. And, we should feel confident counter signaling the culture when we have the biblical warrant to do so, right? Think back to Elijah in 1 Kings 18 with the prophets of Baal. I mean, he's outright mocking them. Isaiah 44 talks about making idols and putting half of the log in the fire for fuel and the other half carving into an idol and bowing down and just making a mockery of these pagan practices. When we have the biblical warrant to do so, we shouldn't be afraid to be proud in a humble and godly sense of God's created order.
How about you, Sam? Would you and your church, would you guys do a faith and family night specifically in June?
Yeah, it's in my context, I was thinking about how does Pride Month interact with the lives of myself and the people in my church. And for my context, I got to say there's very little actually if it weren't for you asking me to do this podcast, I would have hardly thought about Pride Month just because of where I live. There's just not a lot going on. It's conservative and rural. And so in my context, but the thing is, it's always good to celebrate these things. So it doesn't have to be, oh, we're going to compete with the Pride Festival. We don't have that in our town. Maybe I think maybe Owasso has some event. Yeah, I know they did. I looked it up, and they have some event, and that's a town near about 20 minutes from us. That's a little bit bigger. So we don't have that specific type of thing in our context, but it's always good to celebrate these things. We want to support families. I'm not necessarily the guy to go to for church event ideas. It's not oriented that way, but I'm always, whenever people at my church ask me, can we do this? Can we do that? I always say, yeah, let's do it, and you got to plan it now because I'm not very good at that, but I'm in favor of these things, obviously getting together and saying, hey, let's invite the families do we know the families in our area? Do we know where they are, who is here? Good idea in general. I will tell you one quick thing. I saw I was impressed with one of the churches in Owasso nearby. I always drive by it. They have a sign right on the highway on the that everyone drives on, and it's a Baptist church, and they're very they'll put something on the sign that's really direct, and it's always true, but you're like, man, I don't know if I would say it that way. And they had something on the sign that some people on the community Facebook page were complaining about. They said the church has to uncover public wickedness or something. The church must shine a light on public wickedness, and they put it on June 1st, And so, yeah, that did ruffle some people's feathers. They're, posting about it on the community page in the area and saying, how come this church is putting these threatening messages? Not really a threat, obviously, yeah. But, so I thought good for them. They're putting something pretty strong, pretty direct on their sign, and they're not ashamed of saying, hey, this is a public wickedness and we're going to talk about it. So I thought good for them.
Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So I'd written this, that there are businesses and sports teams that they do have faith and family nights, and so I would encourage our listeners to do the same with their businesses. I would encourage pastors and lay members, let's have faith and family nights specifically in June as a counter program to the Pride Month stuff in June. Like the church you mentioned, are we going to catch flack for that? Absolutely. Bring it on, right? Because maybe that means that we can get our people, our older people, our younger people engaged. And then perhaps that gives us the opportunity to teach our people, how do we reach out to a community that's just stuck in all of this sexual deviancy, and how do we reach out to those people who are trapped by the devil's lies? Uh, Maybe it's reminding our young people, if we as pastors and churches are going to be bold like this, that we cannot be coerced into cowardice, that we cannot be scared into silence. And perhaps it's the working the other way, that if we're bold, that we're reaching out to other people who may not be going to church. They may be unchurched and non-church, but they feel the same way that we do. Maybe it's morally, maybe it's politically, and then for whatever reason not going to church. So for example, on Wednesday I got a flat tire, way out of cell cover range because I live in Wyoming, and there was a couple that was there, and by God's grace they helped me. Well, they're an hour and a half away from home, just like we were. They live in Casper, so it gave me an opportunity to invite them to church. But they said, well, they're looking for a church home. They didn't show up today, unfortunately. But the key is maybe doing these kinds of things will waken people up. And maybe it's going to do something like Sam mentioned with the Baptist church, that they see us as bold Lutheran confessional Lutherans, because I mentioned the Augsburg Confession today, August 20 or June 25th, 1530, that we can be bold lay people like those men, those reformers, and then others will be bold too. Uh, is the newspaper and so forth going to write negative stories on us? Yeah, but they'll always do that. They're always going to hate us as Christians. So let's just do it, because that leads to the next bullet point. Are we too risk adverse? Because I was thinking there that perhaps we're dealing with too much filth and foolishness today because pastors and people have stopped preaching God's word into the pagan culture, that we're afraid. We've become risk adverse. We count the cost and think it's too much, and so we stay silent. But here's the thing: as Christians, if we stay silent, the devil keeps on talking, and he keeps gaining ground, and the Christian church keeps losing ground. So, Sam, are we, as lay people, as pastors and churches, are we too risk adverse?
I think if we are being risk averse, maybe that's too risk averse. I mean, what's the risk? Granted, yes. If you talk about, well, here's the thing too. It's different now than it was 10 years ago. There was a lot more canceling. You have to remember that, where canceling isn't, oh, people online don't like you. It used to be canceling was you lose your job and you are on the street. That is what happened to a lot of people for political reasons. Yeah, it wasn't just Christian things, it was political stuff. But that type of thing really was going on more in the past. And now things are a lot different as far as the way people deal with those disagreements in general. It seems there's a lot more opportunity, for example, on the internet for free speech. You see, like Elon Musk buying X is an example. Like a lot of people, and it was political. It's all ranges of political things. It's not specifically even Christian. It's just that you can say a lot of things that that people didn't really, couldn't get away with in the past for whatever reason. And part of that maybe was about LGBT stuff that people get canceled for, and various other things. But now it's a little different. I think that is a good positive change where it's like, yeah, a lot of people are kind of over that. So what's the risk? You gotta be using your judgment. We want to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves, like Jesus says. But there's really no reason to be frightened and fearful. That's not the spirit we've been given in this age either. That's all I have to say about that, I guess.
Yeah. When it comes to being risk adverse, and I mentioned that in my sermon last week, And one of my members said, Pastor, you were really fired up. And a couple other people said, yeah, you were even more animated than usual. I said, yeah, usually when it gets to, standing up for your faith and sanctification, that does get me fired up in preaching. But again, I'm not in the front lines like our listeners are and so forth, the ones we're talking to. But when it comes to risk adverse, uh, I tell Shelly after I come home from mountain biking, I said, well, I almost died, but I don't tell her like how I almost died and so forth. There's going to be risks, but you also want to be cautious because John, who I started biking with, he used to downhill mountain bike, and he said, "Oh, Pastor, the fastest way to go over something is not between the rocks, is just over the rocks. Don't use your brakes." You know, John, what is also my friend is being slow because he raced downhill, so he's going fast downhill. So last week he was behind me on a downhill, and he said, "Someone's behind you." And then right away it was uphill, and he started laughing because that's when I took off because I go faster uphill. But it is gauging everything. But Jesus does say to carry the cross, and the cross is going to hurt. And so we need to count the cost, and we should never say, "Well, that costs too much." Okay. What do you have to say on this topic, Phil?
So, like Sam mentioned earlier, who's the we, right? We've got a lot of great pastors in the synod that teach well. We have a lot of lay people and fathers that teach their families well. But I do think there are some within our synod that are very risk adverse to the point of, and we'll get to this in our next question, not equipping us with the tools we really need to have these conversations. Um, if I could pick on Mike Novotny for a minute with his book Taboo, and again, my filter's probably not going to show you that. I know, Mike, you guys have talked about this on a previous episode, but like, for example, in Taboo, one of the quotes was, "You shouldn't publicly share your views on gay marriage. You shouldn't try to convince gay non-Christians to stop living life like they are. There is a time after lots and lots of love and lots of gospel where you can talk to your LGBTQ plus friends about that profess Christianity about their biblical sexuality," which seems to be an inversion of law and gospel, right? You've got to give them so much gospel that they become a Christian that then you turn on the law, which is a complete inversion of what our Savior says in Mark 1:15, right? Repent and believe the gospel, or, deny yourself, take up the cross and follow me, or count the cost, whoever does not love his father or mother, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The law reveals the guilt of sin and leaves us conscience stricken, and then the gospel enters in our fearful souls to quicken. We don't need to be afraid of talking about these things and applying the law so that we can reveal the gospel, because without the law showing us our sin, why do we need Jesus, right? We need that law to convict us in our hearts. The other quote that kind of troubled me in there is he spends a lot of time talking about how we should be really nice to transgenders because 42% of them could attempt suicide, right? As a fear tactic more than identifying, hey, there's a spiritual issue here that is driving these people crazy and they can't feel comfortable in their own skin and they feel the only thing that they can do is end themselves, right? And that should be a rallying cry. If anything, think about James, pulling them from the fire, hating even the garment stained by the flesh, right? We should care about their souls to a point where it's okay to have awkward conversations and care for their soul and the body that is encapsulating their soul, and try to, show them what is right. Again, we all know this. Salvation is not on us, right? We're just witnesses. We just bear the truth. This is all in Jesus' hands. He knows who are his. They're in his hand. No one can snatch them, right? So we need to be careful that we're not telling people to be so afraid to talk to LGBTQ people and to not be so afraid to offend them, because it's only the offense that will lead them to the gospel. And, tell me if I'm going too far there.
No, I think that's exactly it. A couple of things on that. I was listening to something this morning, and I thought it fit really well here. In the podcaster mentioned how Julian was raised as a Christian, and then he became a pagan, and he became the emperor, I think, in the fourth century. And so he wanted to crush Christianity, but the way he felt to do that was to bring back the old gods. So he reopened the temples of Zeus and Hades and Poseidon and Hera and so forth. And what the early Christians did is they went and reclosed all those temples. That was a risk, and yet they countered the risk of saying they knew what would happen to them if this paganism started coming into their culture. Uh, this paganism of sexuality, it's no different than what the Romans were doing in the first few centuries. It's no different than what the Israelites dealt with in the Canaanite cultures with Baal and Asherah. Uh, and I'm glad one of you guys brought this up earlier too about shame. I think we need to bring back shame. There are a number of people, both on both sides of the political aisle, that were upset that President Trump had a UFC spectacle outside the White House. Okay, whatever you feel on that, uh, I thought personally, I didn't care about the fighting and so forth. Just seeing the military band there and singing, and then the flyovers, that's just really cool. But I think people have forgotten that under President Biden, when they opened up the White House and you had all the gay people there and you had uh, so-called transgender people there with the men who had uh, their fake breasts and they were showing them on television, and then the women who had cut off their breasts to look like men. They're also sharing bare chests and so forth. We should be shaming that kind of stuff because that is improper. Uh, Unlike Billy Joel, who's saying we didn't start the fire, we as Christians, we should start the fire. We should burn all of this kind of stuff to the ground. This is wrong. This is sinful, and we need to be bold in saying that. Do you like that reference? Do you even know that song,
I
Sam?
know that.
We
I
didn't.
know Billy Joel. Yes, my mom's a big fan of Billy Joel, so
Okay.
I know all about Billy Joel. So
Okay. Well, maybe after we're done recording, you can sing the Piano Man for us then.
yes, yeah.
So, last one, Sam, are we equipping our youth for dealing with the dangers of the sins of sexuality?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to this issue, the negative and the positive. And I mean that there's a thing you say no to that we need to equip them, and then there's the yes part of it. And then on the no side of it, when we're talking about homosexuality specifically and promiscuity, and we should speak of those types of problems in general too. We need to be clear, I think, with young people, about the damage that it does physically and spiritually. And we know that we know that causes damage to your body. I mean, that's an important thing to point out. You should say the same thing about pornography as well. If you want to be, even-handed a little bit on sins, yet all these things damage you. And we know this. You can find science on this. We want to be clear that that homosexuality is not just monogamy with two guys. And we were talking about that earlier. That's something that should be talked about and open about and clear about in an age appropriate way, obviously. And some of it gets to be, no one should be thinking about this. You see why Paul said, don't even think about such things, because it gets kind of crazy. So you don't want to spend too much time on it at all. But you want to be clear and say, yeah, there are associations with homosexuality, like drug abuse, like suicide, like mental health issues, mental illness. These are real things. And I think sometimes it gets characterized like this is a kooky talking point, or, oh, that's just propaganda. Well, no, there's data and numbers on this and experiences people have seen. And there are probably people who have been in that lifestyle who would say the same thing, actually, from their personal experience. So it's not like, anybody's making that up. But that's important on the negative side to say, here's the bad things, and there's even worse things you could talk about that I'd rather not. But on the other hand of that, so being soft on those things doesn't actually help you. To being, not talking about those things is not equipping them. It's not helpful. On the flip side, the positive, are we preparing our young people for marriage? If we're talking about the sixth commandment, that's something that parents have an important role in. They're the primary people who have to do that. A lot of people don't prepare their kids for marriage at all, I think. And that's something I'm thinking about in the future. How am I going to do that? And in our culture, it's kind of hard. There's no assumed structure. There's nothing in place structurally for that. Because we should be able to say to young people, actually, it's good for you to get married, and maybe you should get married younger. You're going to be tempted by sexual sin or sexuality until you get married, and it's going to start in high school or earlier. And so actually getting married and being able to fulfill those desires in a God-pleasing way earlier is better. And we need to stop saying to them, just wait till you're out of college, wait till you're established. Oh, they get married, they're 21, that's pretty young. No, it's not, and it's a good thing to get married young, and we should equip them to be able to do that and have them be mature. And there's some things that are really tough to talk about, like, for example, the data on the correlation with going to college for women in particular and marriage is like this. More college means less marriage. That's hard to talk about because you can't say, oh, you can't go to college. Like, it's bad to go to college in itself. Not necessarily, but there's a reality there. There's a thing that we should be able to talk about. Is this going to work out? Is what's important to you in marriage and children and all of those things, or career? And we got to be able to talk about those things. So that's what I think.
Yeah, appreciate that. One of the reasons I came up with this last bullet point was after the last episode, I had people reaching out to me, and they talked about stories of our young people, our confessional Lutheran WELS people, these students in high school, or even going to Wisconsin Lutheran College or Martin Luther College. Go to MLC to become a pastor or teacher, and them supposedly coming out now as gay. And then if that's not bad enough, then their fellow students celebrating them. Okay. Well, why would they celebrate them? Maybe it's empathy, but also because maybe they've been worn down over by the culture for all of these years. And so we as Christian pastors and parents need to do a better job of teaching these things. But like you were saying, Sam, it's tough. I tried touching on some of these things in 7th and 8th grade, but they're middle schoolers. They just laugh and giggle. Okay, it's not real to them. And then they really need to be learning about these things in high school. But my daughters, all 4 of them, graduated from an area Lutheran high school, and all of them said they wish they would have had an apologetics course, just something that would teach them how to defend the Christian faith. That's what apologia means, defense of their faith. Not just on sexuality. That wasn't even a thing we talked about. Just anything, whether it's evolution or anything that the culture or their universities, because every university, unless it's like a Hillsdale College or a Lutheran college or classical college, they're all going to have all of this wokeness, and this is going to be shoved down their throat. How do they combat that in this culture? And I like what you said of, we got to not just teach them the negative, but also the positive. With the 16s I've got here, we did a Bible study on Christ's marriage versus the marriage of man. And, there I talked to them about get married young, build your lives together. I said, I did not teach this properly when I was younger. I said, I taught people in catechism class, date and then go to college, and then get married. Well, the problem is so many people are having sex those 4 years of college or in the workforce and so forth. And then now what do you do? Well, do I marry the person I have a baby with, but I don't get along with them? I just had sex with them. So better, why not, find someone to date in high school and so forth, early years of your adulthood, and then marry that person. And then rather than have 2 separate homes and 2 separate college bills, let's just grow together and build something together. Get married young, and I told the kids, and then give your parents lots of grandbabies. Okay, I had teens quoting me back to their parents on that. So teach them both the negative and the positive. Phil, are we equipping our youth?
Can I add on one thing to that
Yeah,
real quick?
Yeah.
I was just going to say also then that now I lost my train of thought. Sorry. Go on, Phil.
Well, all right, Phil, and then you can think of it. Yeah. This is why I write everything down in the episode, Sam. Is I'm always writing notes because I'll never remember it otherwise.
I know. I thought of a new thought and then it left. Sorry about that.
No, I was gonna say Sam knocked it out of the park. Like we talked about last episode. If we're going to be authentic on this issue, we need to not just talk about homosexuality and LGBTQ. We need to be talking about premarital sex. We need to be talking about serial monogamy. We need to be talking about the other, Christianized or secular sins that, follow the proper, male-female coupling paradigm, right? And then talking about, getting married young and, you can't just say you shouldn't send your daughters off to college, but there may be wisdom in encouraging your kids to stay local. So, like, for example, my kids both went to college locally. UAH, University of Alabama, Huntsville, is 9 miles from my house. One lives outside the home, one still lives at home, but we see them in church every Sunday. We get together for a meal once or twice a week. We do a Bible study together. As a parent, your responsibility doesn't end when they're 18, right? So, keeping them in the word, keeping them directed, observing their lives, observing the culture, and finding ways to talk to them about those things to prepare them is great. Encourage them to get married young. So, Mike, I'm using your Bible study with a young men's group at church. And that was just 2 weeks ago when we talked about the marriage issue of God versus marriage of man. And yeah, I spent a lot of time just reaffirming that, sex is a beautiful thing within the confines of marriage, right? And so if that's something you desire, you should make finding a woman your priority. And you should make sure that when you're dating with a purpose and you're looking for a person that's godly that you can spend the rest of your life with and have kids and grandkids and so on and so forth. And that if God, for some reason, gave you the gift of celibacy, like Paul says, that's a valuable gift too, and you should find a way to use it for the benefit of the church. In my life, my dad was 21 when I was born. I got married at 21. I had my first son at 22. He was born a month before I graduated college. And I wouldn't have it any other way because, my wife and I never knew what it was like to live on two incomes. Okay, technically we had two incomes. I was making $7 an hour. She was making $8 an hour. But we never knew what it was like to be two, dual income, no kids, right? So, we always just never knew what that was like, right? But we had kids and, we had a mortgage and, we paid it most months. And, you struggle a little bit early on, but that shared struggle, bonds you together and it bonds you to your kids. And you remember the good old days, when, it was popcorn and whatever we found on the TV Friday night. Yeah, you should get married young. You should focus. Marriage should be as much a priority as your career, if not more so, right? The right woman will make or break you in many ways. That's something I've told my kids. But yeah, we should definitely be encouraging, chastity, both inside and outside of marriage, and having those kids realize that dating is not a phase or a social thing. It's a way to find the woman that you'll spend the rest of your life with and raise your kids with and die and go to heaven with, right?
Yeah. So before I throw it back to you, Sam, so with that too, I think the epistle lesson for the Sunday, I preached on it today, 1 Timothy 6. 2 parts there. In the middle, Paul says, fight the good fight of faith. But before that, he says, flee. Well, what are you supposed to flee? Well, look at verses 9 and 10 of 1 Timothy 6. And then he says, pursue. And then he lists the number of virtues that we are to pursue. That's what we need to be teaching. And don't let it fall to your pastors. Sam's a great pastor. I think I'm okay. My members say, well, you're so, pastor. So don't let it fall to your pastors. Do what Phil is doing. Do it. We had a pastor and his family stay with us this weekend. I'm just used to the common table prayer. They said in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and they crossed themselves and another prayer before they got to the meal prayer. they had their Bible there for their family devotion in their little minivan as they're driving 8 hours to their next stop and so forth. Do those kinds of things. Have these conversations. I was texting my daughter yesterday, asking her about dating, and I said, "Do you need me to find you a man?" And she said, "No, I don't need you to be a matchmaker." So I sent her, uh, oh, it's from the musical. I forget another name. Fiddler on the Roof, and I sent her the song "Matchmaker, Matchmaker," and she just laughed. And uh, I can find a good Wells guy for my daughters, and I think there's something to be said for that of having uh, making sure your parents, especially your dads, give approval. So, Sam, did you remember what you were going to bring up
Yes,
there?
I was just going to add on, in addition to the parents being actively involved and teaching and helping them find uh, husbands and wives, is there a role that the church has to play? And I think in the past, there was a stronger, generations ago. And I don't know if any of us have experienced that. Maybe baby boomers had more of a structure. I'm not sure. Some people say that. You can dispute it or not. But the point is, we have no structures right now of matchmaking. You have to just go on a dating app, or you're in school, you're in college, you find somebody, and a lot of people get married. People do find people. It's not like it's impossible. Some people think it's hopeless, but that's not really true. It's just that there are some challenges, and I think that I want to think about how can a church community, whether that is official church events or it's unofficial, we want to think intentionally about, can we get our young people together so that we can find them a husband and a wife? We have a few young people in my church. Our church is pretty small. We don't have that many options. Maybe a couple of them could get married, but there's really only like one option for each. And maybe that's not ideal. But we got other Wells churches in the area. And my dream is to get more involved with them and in various ways. And one of those ways could be, maybe you don't say, you don't have to tell the kids, this is so you can find a girlfriend. You can just say, we're having youth group night, and we're having we're going to get together with the other three churches in the area, and we're going to do some activity for youth group. You don't got to say, and now pick a wife. But isn't that something that would lead to good things?
Yeah.
I think generally you put young men and women together, and good things tend to happen. So I'm trying to work on that. It's always challenging to get together with other churches and do stuff, just because of different schedules, different customs.
Right.
But I'm blessed to have several churches within driving distance. Not everyone you don't have that in Wyoming, and maybe not in Alabama either. So I want to use that blessing that I have here, and all the more so if you're in Wisconsin, you should be doing that. All the
There
more.
you go.
Or maybe a lot of them are bigger.
Yeah, you bring the pizza and the kids will bring the hormones, right? You don't have to tell
And
them
that's
what
a great
to do.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing. It's a godly thing. Yeah. So like our church in Alabama. So I met my wife. My wife was from the other side of Wisconsin. I was from the east side. She's from the west side. We met in Alabama because we went to the same Wells church we go to now. Small church. Almost everyone's over 50. My pastor said, there's this girl coming down, Phil. You should help move her in. And yeah, I helped move her in, and she, tells her side of the story of how she saw me. And she's like, oh, there's a boy down here. And I saw her. And it's like, well, we're the only two people in our age bracket, and we're both from Wisconsin. We both share the same love of our Savior. We should probably spend some time together and see if this is going to work. And it worked out beautifully. We've been married 22 years. We got kids. It was great. But like, for example, my kids in the same church, even bigger, there weren't women for them. And so they're both dating outside of Lutheran. And so that's been a combination of blessing and struggle, right? Some difficult conversations with their girlfriends and trying to work through, because they're coming from a different perspective, but their faith is just as strong, and they've been raised in a different way of thinking about the Bible, different way of thinking about their salvation. But at the same time, it's caused our kids to have to spend time in the Word and really understand what they believe. So again, I would have loved to have gotten them good Lutheran wives from the get-go, but at the same time, there's the opportunity there to talk with other Christians and have your faith challenged and spend time understanding what you really believe. Because I know my kids at 19 and 21 can articulate the faith better than I could have at 19 or 21. Right.
Well, here's what you can do then, Phil, with your boys, because I had a member like this in Racine. So his boys, he had two sons and a daughter, and with the boys, they were dating someone outside the faith. And so he gave each of those girls the Book of Concord and then had them read it so that the guys could then
So
go through that with them. There you go.
one of them has, and yeah, we talked about it too. You know, her quote was, "It was really a slog reading through most of it, but she appreciated the small cult articles," which again was Luther's kind of, you know, last will and testament. And yeah, he had some polemic in there, but it was a little softer and a little more, you know, this is the Christian faith. And so she really appreciated that.
Nice. Well, I appreciate it today. I talked about the presentation of the Augsburg Confession in my sermon. One of the young moms said in fellowship time, Pastor, we should study the Augsburg Confession for a Bible study. Amen. I'm right there. And I promoted for the first time today. We're having a youth event for all of Wyoming. So we only have 5 Welsh churches in the state, and it's probably like 25 youth. I had not thought of this to be like a dating event, but I'm going to promote it that way after talking to you guys.
It's not even necessary. It's just going to happen.
Yeah, it's just going to happen. I love. Well, part of it is, and I did tell the teens, and I told the parents today, is we are going to force them with a scavenger hunt. You can't be with another teen from your church. You have to be with other teens from the other 4 churches in town or in the state. You have to get to know each other. So we'll wrap it up here with this is, and I did a funeral for a gentleman a couple of years ago back in Racine, and he's just like you guys talking about finding a date, his girlfriend on a youth event. He would tell it always that he met her while bowling. Well, she would say, well, we met at the church. Well, they're both right because they met at Frieden's in Kenosha, which at that time had a 2-lane bowling alley in their basement. So meeting at the youth event, bowling, and then getting married. One last thing before I close with a Bible verse is encourage all of our listeners to pray for Josh. You notice he's not been on for a long time. I'm not going to get into why he's not on. You can reach out to him, but you can reach out to God with prayers. But Andy was going to be on, so I thank Sam for filling in last minute. Andy had some health issues with his family, so just ask for your prayers, just real general like that, to pray for his family. And then lastly, notice when you read Romans chapter 1, I'm always amazed that talking about not being risk adverse and being bold. Paul is writing to Christians in a very decadent Rome. I have to believe Rome was more decadent than America in the 21st century. And yet, what does he do? He talks about homosexuality in the first chapter. But before he gets to the sin of homosexuality, he writes this going against nature and creator. Romans 1, verses 22 and to 25. Although they claim to be wise, they have become fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human, or like birds, 4-footed animals, and crawling things. So as they followed the sinful desires of their hearts, God handed them over to the impurity of degrading their own bodies among themselves. Such people have traded the truth about God, the lie, worshiping and serving the creature rather than the Creator, who is worthy of praise forever. Amen. Lord's blessings until next week.